Hello and good morning or good afternoon or good evening or good whatever time of night or day it happens to be wherever you happen to be. This is going to be what I had referred to as the post-show ramble and rant for my Republic News Tuesday. I realize that today is Saturday, or at least at this point while I'm recording this little sort of introductory bit. But the original thing, the entire thing, the pre-show, the show, and this, or what's about to follow, was all recorded on Sunday. It was intended to be released on Monday, as I've said before, and unfortunately, the pre-show didn't get released until Tuesday, a little bit before midnight, and then the show was released on Wednesday. So I apologize. The editing process took quite a bit longer than I had anticipated. Now, this next portion is not really post-show, and it's not entirely ramble and rant. Quite a bit of it is, in fact, news that I was going to cover on the show. But unfortunately, there is, that was rather, an hour already, and I think this is going to be about 2 hours or so, because I did, in the midst of reading the news, go off, rambling and ranting a bit about this and that. Some of you will have heard some of the things that I'm going to ramble and rant about before, and you won't have heard all of the things that I'm going to ramble and rant about before. So at any rate, this isn't really post-show ramble and rant. It's sort of the rest of the show with some rambling and ranting. Anyway, that having been said and gotten out of the way, let me go ahead and start that portion. Stay tuned. So now, turning to somewhat better news. On Saturday, the 2nd of February, 2019, Tulsi Gabbard did her live ALOHA launch of her presidential campaign for 2020 live from Hawaii. We'll include a link to the video in the collection of references wherever they wind up being. In less pleasant, when I say better news or good news or whatever, because of all the candidates for the Democratic nomination who have announced or have stated that they are have launched an exploratory campaign, or who have officially launched their campaign for the Democratic nomination, Tulsi Gabbard may be the only one who is an authentic modern progressive. We've seen Kamala Harris, who is a Fauxgressive opportunist. Now, we've also seen Cory Booker. I'll be talking about him momentarily, who is another Fauxgressive opportunist. We've seen Elizabeth Warren, another Fauxgressive opportunist. Marianne, what's her name? That's Oprah's spiritual advisor. I don't really know what the hell to describe her as. A few other people. Kirsten Gillibrand, another Fauxgressive opportunist. So far it's like Obama, Hillary type candidates, neoliberals pretending to be progressive in an effort to con modern progressives into voting for them, giving them campaign contributions, maybe doing some campaign work and so forth. And there are, as I said, hints that Bernie is going to run. He would be a modern progressive. Tulsi may be a modern progressive. She's pretty close, at least. And of all those who have announced so far as I'm aware, like I said, I haven't watched the Super Bowl, so I don't know what's going on there. Tulsi Gabbard is the only one that I would vote for in the Democratic primary. Now, I live in a state with open primaries, so I don't have to be registered as a Democrat to vote in the Democratic primary. And I'm not registered as a Democrat. I've never been registered as a Democrat. I'm a Green Party member. But anyway, yeah, so she's the only one running for the Democratic nomination that I would vote for in the primary. When the general election gets here, we will see who is running on the Green Party ticket and who has won the Democratic nomination, and, you know, examine all of our options and see what I will, who I will be voting for. Now, I do not vote for personalities. I'm not a follower of cult of personality. This is one of the things that some of my fellow burners didn't quite get back in 2016 when I was very obviously supporting Jill Stein after the Democratic National Convention that year, and I was occasionally critical of Bernie and have continued to be occasionally critical of him since then. You know, Bernie is a nice guy, and he has some good ideas. It doesn't mean I agree with everything he says, and I certainly didn't agree with him endorsing Hillary Clinton and campaigning for her. You know, there is a lot of speculation about why he did what he did. There are people who say that he's a sheepdog, that he sold out, that he had planned from the beginning to do this, that it was all a big game, he was controlled opposition, blah, blah, blah. There are people who suggest that he may have been threatened by someone, or that some member of his family or members of his family might have been threatened by someone. There are people who say that he had some kind of agreement with the Democratic Party when he opted to run as a Democrat, that he would in fact endorse whoever wound up as the Democratic nominee, and he kept his word. To that latter, I would say, you know, the Democratic Party didn't deal fairly with him in that campaign in the primary election. And so, I come from an old school of thought as far as contracts go, and that is, if one party to a contract violates any part of the contract, the other party to the other party or parties to the contract are under no obligation to continue to honor it. But for the moment, this is all speculation. We don't know. No one knows except Bernie why he did what he did. Jane might have a better idea than most anyone else, but only Bernie knows for sure. So, I mean, we can speculate until we're blue in the face. We can be angry. We can be sad. We can feel betrayed. Whatever. It's all speculation, and none of us has the ability to read his mind or see into his heart to discern what his motivations were, what actuated him to do what he did, and so forth, and so on. And under the same circumstances, any of us might have performed even more unwisely than some of us may have thought that he did. So I'm not going to condemn the guy because I don't know his motivations, and I don't know the situation, the context in which he made that decision. But anyway, in significantly less pleasant news, something more about Tulsi, and no, it's not that she was a bad person or whatever. This is from NBC News, and it's a smear piece, and it's more Russophobia. This is, let's see, this was published on the 2nd of February 2019. It's by Robert Windrum and Ben Popkin, and it says, Russia's propaganda machine discovers 2020 Democratic candidate Tulsi Gabbard. Experts who track websites and social media linked to Russia have seen stirrings of a possible campaign of support for Hawaii Democrat Tulsi Gabbard. It has a less than flattering photograph of her to lead in. The Russian propaganda machine that tried to influence the 2016 U.S. election is now promoting the presidential aspirations of a controversial Hawaii Democrat who earlier this month declared her intention to run for president in 2020. An ABC News analysis of the main English-language news sites employed by Russia in its 2016 election meddling shows Representative Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii, who is set to make her formal announcement Saturday, has become a favorite of the sites Moscow used when it interfered in 2016. Oh, Jesus fucking Christ. You know what to expect from this, and it goes on for another 2 or 3 maybe 4 more pages of drivel from the establishment. Well, it's actually a little longer than that. So, yeah, several more pages of this, and it's all kind of bullshit, basically. It's more Hillary can't admit that she was a shitty candidate, and her campaign people can't admit that her supporters were assholes to burners. I mean, I saw it myself back in the primary, early in the primary, that the people who were supporting Hillary were bound and determined that she was going to be the winner, and Bernie couldn't possibly win, and we should all come on board Hillary's bandwagon and support her instead of Bernie, even before we had a chance to vote one way or another. And when we kept insisting no, fuck no, even after we had voted, they just became ruder and ruder, and it was always the same shit that it has been for some time. Well, you're just a sexist. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to vote for Jill Stein. She's a woman. I'm a woman. I'm a sexist now? We just internalized misogyny. Fuck off with your bullshit. It is not internalized misogyny. I knew Hillary Clinton. I mean, I didn't know her personally, but I knew who she was long before most of you fuckers ever even heard of her. So grow the fuck up and don't. I mean, did Russia go back in time to the 1980s when Bill Clinton was the governor of Arkansas when I lived in Arkansas? And influence me then? Did Russia have a time machine? Did Russia invent a time machine and go back to the 1980s to turn me off on Hillary back then? Because I was turned off on her back then. I have never trusted that woman, and I never will. Okay? So, and there you go. Let's see. So, there's more of this. And if you want to look at this shit, the link will be in the references, wherever they wind up being. It's not just this. There's some more. Yes, there is more. All right, so we have some more Russophobia. I mean, at this point, it's like Rachel Maddow with her Russia stuff from all over the place. This comes from The Atlantic, published on the 2nd of February 2019 by Natasha Bertrand. Russia is attacking the U.S. system from within. A new filing by Special Counsel Robert Mueller shows how Russia uses the federal courts to go after its adversaries. A new court filing submitted on Wednesday by Special Counsel Robert Mueller revealed that a Russian troll farm, currently locked in a legal battle over its alleged interference in the 2016 election, appeared to wage yet another disinformation campaign late last year, this time targeting Mueller himself. According to the filing, the Special Counsel's office turned over 1 million pages of evidence to lawyers for Concord Management and Consulting as part of the discovery process. The firm is accused of funding the troll farm known as the Internet Research Agency, but someone connected to Concord allegedly manipulated the documents and leaked them to reporters, hoping the documents would make people think that Mueller's evidence against the troll farm and its owners was flimsy. The tactic didn't seem to convince anyone, but it appeared to mark yet another example of Russian exploiting the U.S. justice system to undercut its rivals abroad. Now, hold up. Now, I've talked about this before. There was a New York Times report 4 or 5 years ago. Porter had investigated this group, the Internet Research Agency, and his conclusion was that they were kind of bungling group of people that were trying to learn how to use social media for advertising purposes. Have you seen these ads that are supposed to have influenced the American people? This is all such utter bullshit. What $4,000 total was spent on Google. I don't remember how much they spent on Facebook and Twitter and whatever, supposedly, but at any rate, over half of the ads didn't even show up until after the election. Some of them were never seen by anybody. I mean, we had ads of an image that was supposed to be of Jesus and a young man in today's modern Western society somewhere, and it was a statement that said, the caption read, "Masturbation is tough," or a challenge or something like that. Something about asking for Jesus's help and we can beat it together. This is supposed to have somehow influenced people to hate Hillary Clinton and vote for Donald Trump. It had nothing to do with the election whatsoever. These are the most ridiculous fucking things. I mean, who in their right goddamn mind, who with the shred of critical thinking ability whatsoever, could honestly believe that this group, Internet Research Agency, was somehow backed by the Kremlin and somehow managed to spend such a tiny amount of money on very well targeted ads on social media that managed to sway enough people that Donald Trump would win the election? No, I mean, did the Internet Research Agency convince Hillary not to campaign in the Rust Belt? Did the Internet Research Agency convince Hillary's supporters to be condescending, smug assholes to everyone else? Did they convince... this is such utter fucking bullshit. There is nothing rational about this. People, please, seriously, wake the fuck up. Yes, Donald Trump is coarse, he's abrasive, he's rude, he's unpolished. But he's not a fascist. He's not a radical departure from the business of usual of the two parties for the past 40 years. It's the same shit. He might even be a little less extreme about it. From what I've seen, there is some evidence that he is an objectivist or a neo-objectivist instead of a neoliberal, and he hasn't been overly bellicose, although this business with Venezuela is something of a change. I mean, he's certainly postured a bit with Kim Jong, what's his name? Il-un, whichever one, I can't keep them straight, in North Korea, bluster, blowhard. What did I say before the general election in 2016? I said, the Democratic Party trots out this tired old trope every time they run a candidate who is completely uninspiring or lacks personality, like Al Gore in 2000. Al Gore had the personality of a dead fish. Okay, so what did they do? Oh, George W. Bush is a fascist. Well, they do it every time. Hillary Clinton, nobody trusted her except the extremely gullible. And people who don't really know her record, people who have never had any kind of encounter with her or anything of the sort. I call it the big bad wolf strategy that they use. It's the little Democratic Party who cried wolf kind of thing. They are trying to make out like Donald Trump was the big bad wolf, and I was like, no, he's a big orange blowhard. Okay, he's not going to even attempt to do half the shit he claims he's going to do because he doesn't have the authority to do it as president, and some of it is frankly just, bullshit like all politicians spew when they're campaigning. He doesn't intend to do half of it, and it boggles my mind how they can constantly use this argumentum ad metum, which is what it is, an appeal to fear. It's a logical fallacy. where you try to scare people into doing something, okay? So, for example, there are a number of different kinds of logical fallacies that involve an appeal to emotion, and quite a few of them are used in political rhetoric. So you have like appeal to patriotism, which is, appealing to people's patriotic sentiments in an effort to get their support, their vote, whatever. Whereas you yourself, the candidate, may or may not have a shred of patriotism whatsoever. You certainly are willing to exploit the patriotism of others in an effort to win their support. You've got the appeal to pity. Poor little Hillary. It's her turn. She didn't get to be president before, and it was her. She deserves her chance now. No, she doesn't. She has to actually prove that she's worthy of the office to the American voters. Okay? Not only that, but the founders didn't want the presidential contest to be a popularity contest, which is why we have the Electoral College. And as I've said before, I know there are people who keep insisting that the Electoral College is a vestige of slavery. Yes and no. Yes, in that, the 3/5 of a person, blah, blah, blah. Well, who it was that actually supported that? Because the South wanted all the slaves to count as full people for the purposes of how many representatives they got in the U.S. House of Representatives and how many electoral votes they would get. The North wouldn't have that. No, we can't do that. No. So finally, the same guy who proposed counting the slaves, South Carolina politician, proposed, okay, why don't we just count them as 3/5 of a person? And the North agreed to that. So it's not really a vestige of slavery and racism so much as it is the North not wanting to count them as full people. And the North is supposed to be the one that has the moral high ground, right? Yeah, about that. Where the majority of slaves came into the country? The North. Boston. And the people up north then sold the slaves to the people in the South. So don't pretend to me like the North has no guilt in the institution of slavery in the United States. They absolutely did. And as far as that goes, today, it's well over 100 years since slavery ended. There's no one alive today who was a slave or who owned a slave. There's no one alive today who sold slaves. So don't pretend that anybody has a moral high ground in the issue. But more than that, if you really want to know why the Electoral College exists, go read Federalist Paper number 10. It was written by James Madison. He will explain in great detail why the Electoral College exists. He talks about factions, what we call political parties today. He talks about fads. And if you want to read a little more, you can read Alexander Hamilton's very brief discussion in Federalist Paper number, I think it was 68, where he gives his position on it. But at any rate, the point that Madison was making was that he didn't want to see demagogues managed to take over the country through appealing to fads and building up factions or political parties that would support whatever happens to be the fad of the week. So, like, for example, back in the early 90s, there was a certain vegetable spread that was supposedly heart smart. It was so much better for you than butter. And everyone was all into this latest health craze fad. And then a few years later, we find out that it's full of trans fat, which is even worse than saturated fat that you would get from butter. I don't know what happened to that company. I haven't seen that particular vegetable spread in a very long time. Obviously, it's not as popular as it was at one time. But see, fads come and go. And someone being popular is not necessarily a qualification for them to be president of the United States. The whole business about the Electoral College being a vestige of slavery and racism the first time I can recall having ever heard that was following the 2016 election, when Hillary had won the popular vote, but didn't campaign in a way to win the electoral votes necessary to win the presidency. And I mean, as I've said before, if Hillary were really as experienced and intelligent and competent as all of her supporters kept telling all of us she was, and how so qualified to be president, wouldn't she have been intelligent and experienced and competent enough to know that you can't just campaign in the 5 or 6 largest population centers in the United States? You need to campaign to win the Electoral College votes as well. Madison was talking about what he, Alexis de Tocqueville was a French writer, political philosopher, historian, who had come to America to, learn about the new country, the new nation that was being formed, and was here during the Federalist and Anti-Federalist debates, and he gave a name to what Madison was talking about, and many of you who are familiar with politics and political history and so forth have doubtless heard the name that he gave to it, tyranny of the majority. That is what de Tocqueville named the idea that Madison was objecting to. That was why Madison had supported the idea of the Electoral College. And I've actually, in trying to explain this to people, I've had them retort ridiculous nonsense to me like, well, then you're just going to wind up with the tyranny of the minority. No, that's not, no, Jesus Christ. I mean, seriously, look, the founding fathers were educated in Greek and Latin and classical history. They had studied political philosophy from the Enlightenment period and from before, going back into the classical period in Greece and Rome. So they knew Plato, they knew Aristotle, they knew Seneca, they knew Cicero. And republics have a tendency to devolve into empires, as happened with the Republica Romana, which became the Imperium Romanum. Okay, the Roman Republic devolved into the Roman Empire. They also knew, however, that democracies tended to devolve into dictatorships because of this kind of tyranny of the majority, where the majority would elect some kind of demagogue based on whatever happened to be the popular fad of the moment, and that demagogue would appeal to that fad, use rhetoric. I mean, we've seen this as a characteristic of fascist politicians and neoliberal politicians for a very long time now. They appeal to things like patriotism. They appeal to the middle class, even though they themselves are, upper class, wealthier people, and have no intention of helping out the middle class whatsoever. They appeal to traditional values. And I mean, I don't think I have to go into any great detail about the so-called guardians of decency who show up periodically proclaiming that we need to have a religious or moral revival in the country, and how wrong this is and how wrong that is, and how often these people wind up getting exposed as guilty of the very things they themselves are condemning. I mean, we've got Jimmy Swaggart got caught with a prostitute. We got Jim Baker got caught with having an affair with the church secretary. We've got countless Republican politicians, political figures, who have had numerous extramarital affairs. They've have had divorces several times. We've got instances of anti-gay politicians who oppose legislation that would recognize gay people as human beings, as equal, give them the same rights as other people, like the ability to marry. Oh my God, but it's a religious thing, it's a sacrament. No, it's not. Most of you fuckers that claim this are Baptists. I used to be a Baptist. I know goddamn good and well that there are 2 sacraments in the Southern Baptist Church and most other Baptist churches in the United States, and they are baptism and the Lord's Supper, not marriage. And guess what else? Marriage itself, marriage is just a civil social contract. That's it. You're talking about a sacrament involving marriage, you're talking about some of the apostolic churches like the Roman Catholic Church, the Anglicans, the Episcopalians, the Orthodox churches. They have 7 sacraments, among which is one known as holy matrimony. Matrimonium is the Latin word. Matrimonium is not the same thing as marriage. It's a specific type of marriage. Boom. So you got all these guys that were supposedly good, moral Christian fellows who were opposed to same-sex marriage, who were opposed to equal rights for gay people, and they get caught waving their hand under the stall in a public men's room at the airport, trying to solicit gay sex, anonymous gay sex. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with divorce. There's nothing inherently wrong with, having a relationship with more than one person, assuming that everyone involved is consenting and an adult. There is such a thing as an open relationship, an open marriage. It's not something that I myself would be interested in, but there are people who do that. Just because it's not something that I'm into doesn't mean that I have any moral high ground to condemn those people. There's a thing called freedom, right? And there's a thing called the First Amendment, which has a non-establishment clause. You can't prohibit the free exercise of religion, but you also can't establish any particular religion or sect of any religion, or religion in general. You have to respect other people's differing views. So, there's not, and there's certainly nothing wrong with homosexuality. There's nothing wrong with engaging in same-sex acts. These are natural things that people do. Animals do these things too. So other animals, I should say, because humans are animals. The point is not that these people did anything wrong by doing those specific things. The point is that they did something wrong by being fucking hypocrites. Okay? So, again, these appeals to these kind of emotional, deeply held, passionate views, or, then again, the appeal to fear that I started to talk about. It's the same thing. You kind of, when you have this kind of monopolistic dualism in a society, and that underlies so much of the unexamined assumptions of the people, you wind up with certain things that arise, certain symptoms of this, and certain dysfunctions. So you would have double standards, and we've certainly seen this. I mean, for example, a few years back, when Kristen Stewart had kind of a fling with the director of that movie, there were people who just vilified her. I mean, they shredded her. She was persona non grata, and she was vampire slut and all this kind of stuff because she was involved in a relationship with Robert Pattinson, and she went and did whatever she did with this other guy. And she was the one that took all the blame for this. I don't remember a lot of outrage about the director. I remember a lot of outrage about the actress. It takes two to tango, people. If she were guilty, so was the director. But the outrage was all aimed at her and not the director. Double standard. I've talked about this before. You have this kind of attitude toward sexual promiscuity, and it differs for women from how it is for men. A man is considered to be sowing his wild oats, boys will be boys, blah, blah, blah. A woman, well, she's a slut. And there's no comparable word that's applied to a man. I mean, nowadays there's kind of this, you're a man slut kind of thing, but it's not really the same. In fact, a lot of guys seem to revel in that for some reason. The closest that we come would be to call the man a scoundrel or a roué, which is a French word. Kind of means rogue, but it's a little less complimentary, I guess, or a little less kind of, I don't know, the concept of roguish, good looks, and, that kind of adventurous kind of life of danger, that kind of thing. You don't really have that so much with the, you don't really have that. That concept with the French word roué. Scoundrel is a word that's, it's still kind of not exactly a compliment, but there are people who are like, wow, he's just a scoundrel, and it's kind of, they say it with a hint of making an excuse for the guy, or maybe even some kind of admiration. It's a double standard. We've got the bifurcation fallacy, which I've bitched about for 20 years, and I'm sure you've heard me bitch about it before if you've seen any of my videos or read any of my work. Bifurcation fallacy is the presentation of two and only two options when more than two exist. It's a type of false dilemma, which goes by assorted other names: false dichotomy, black and white thinking, black or white thinking. It's a limitation of choices. So the wider type of fallacy, false dilemma, is you've got X number of choices available, but only a limited selection of those choices are presented. Bifurcation fallacy is specifically, you've got two choices presented when more than two exist. And these things lead into various symptoms, including this attitude of kind of polarization, the idea that there are polar opposites, the denial that there is such a thing as a complementary opposite. I mean, look, justice and mercy are not polar opposites, they're complementary opposites. You can't have one without the other. They have to both exist. You can't have justice without fairness. Okay? Because if you do, then it's just cruelty and it's not justice. You can't have mercy without strength and the ability to stand up when something is actually unjust and deal with it in an appropriate manner. Because if you do, then it just becomes masochism. You become a doormat and people walk all over you. So, I mean, there has to be this balance. Those are complementary opposites. Male and female are complementary opposites. They're not polar opposites. So, but this concept of polarization arises as a result of these dysfunctions which are spawned by the assumption of monopolistic dualism. And polarization we've seen more and more in this country, with people kind of getting into one or the other of two perspectives. They're not necessarily party, but that's certainly a part of it. They can be ideological, so you'd have this kind of conservative versus liberal kind of thing. And then what about the radicals? What about the ultra-conservatives? What about the regressives? What about the progressives? What about the moderates? What about the, the reactionaries? What about the, there are other options there. But people tend to devolve into these two camps and interact with one another less and less as time goes on. And as this continues, another symptom arises that's called demonization of the other. It's you other that other group, and you then demonize them because they are other than you. And as a result of bifurcation fallacy, it gets to the point where you can't see anything except those two camps. So if you're not one of us, then you must be one of them. as if there aren't other options available. I mean, for example, I've said this before, I think maybe in a video or a live stream. I used to, my dad was, bless his heart, a lifelong Republican. We argued about politics and religion constantly, almost, it seemed. But there would be times when I would be bitching about the Democratic Party. And I would go on and on about the Democrats for half an hour or more. And Dad would sit there contentedly, he kind of not really listening, but hearing what I was saying and not bothered by it at all and generally approving. And then if I started to say anything about any Republican or the Republican Party, not more than, 2 or 3 sentences in, he would accuse me of being a damn Democrat. And I'm like, Dad, I just spent half an hour bitching about the Democrats. Obviously, I'm not a Democrat. But that doesn't mean that I have to be a Republican. I'm a Green. He couldn't wrap his head around it. So, I mean, there's that kind of thing. And we see it a lot with the some of the people on the right who look at modern progressives, and because, I mean, it's a little more complicated here because there's a lot of misuse of terminology. There are people who call themselves progressives who aren't, who don't have any legitimate claim to the name, who have no lineage from the historical progressive movement, who are advocating things that are actually regressive. And you've also got people who are actually social liberals who simply tried to rebrand after the 1988 election because they didn't want to be associated with the caricature that the Republicans had turned the word liberal into throughout the 1980s. And they just changed their name. They didn't change any of their views. They didn't adopt any progressive values or ideals. They continue to be social liberals, but they called themselves progressives. Then you've got this new group that came up around 2016 who started claiming to be progressives because, they were politicians, or they were already in office, or they wanted to be in office, and they saw how popular Bernie Sanders was, and they knew that Bernie Sanders called himself a progressive, and there was a whole group of people, a movement building up around Bernie and his ideals. And so they thought, well, hey, if we pretend that we're progressive, if we call ourselves progressive, maybe we can get elected, and blah blah blah. So there, there's that. But the point is, there are progressives. And they tend to get confused with regressives, outrage mongers, neo-Puritans, the people who wear their identities on their sleeve or put them on their shoulder as a chip to be knocked off so they can then pretend to be victims. That kind of thing. That's not progressive. Why is it not progressive? Well, you're just doing no true Scotsman. No, I'm not. Go read my fucking article at Real Progressive's website and see what I said about the name progressive. I wrote it last month. Oh, no, December. It's there. You can find it. realprogressivesus.com. So, yeah, go check that out and see what I'm talking about. There's also this tendency among people on the right to see anyone who is even slightly to the left of Ronald Reagan as a communist. Like there's no such thing as a social democrat, which is a mixed economy, centrism. That's real centrism, not the neoliberals who claim to be centrists. And by the way, Ronald Reagan was a neoliberal. Every president we've had since Ronald Reagan has been a neoliberal, except maybe Trump, who might be an objectivist or a neo-objectivist. It's kind of hard to say because there's a lot of similarity between objectivism and neo-objectivism and neoliberalism. I mean, they certainly do engage in the same kind of promotion of laissez-faire, deregulation, anti-labor, that kind of free market capitalism bullshit. But anyway, so there are social democrats. There are also many types of socialists, as well as Marxists. So not everybody to the left of Ronald Reagan is a communist. Some are social democrats, some are other types of socialists, some are, capitalists, but not batshit crazy, okay? But as this polarization continues, there's a gravitation further and further into that kind of corporatist, extremist right-wing perspective. And by the same token, you've got people who have formed themselves into groups like Antifa and By Any Means Necessary and Black Bloc, and anyone who disagrees with even the slightest of their dogmas is automatically branded a fascist or a fascist sympathizer. Maybe we just don't like the idea of using violence as a political tactic, That could be it, huh? Couldn't it? Yeah, it could, because it is. So this whole kind of demonization of the other and this kind of limiting of possible perspectives into two and only two, the othering of anyone who isn't in your particular little in-group, all of that is a part and parcel of this hell that we have entered into, basically, as a society. I've talked about the bifurcation fallacy before. It's not just limited to politics. You've got this. It's not just limited to economics. You've got this thing like the cola wars of the 1980s, where it's Coke versus Pepsi. What about RC Cola? What about Shasta Cola? What about other caffeinated beverages which are not colas, like Dr. Pepper, like Barq's root beer? You didn't know Barq's root beer had caffeine in it, did you? Well, it does. Go look on the ingredients list. Most root beers don't, but Barq's does. And it's Barq's, not Bargs. That's a Q, not a G. What about non-caffeinated sodas like 7-Up and Sprite and Sierra Mist, ginger ale, Orange Crush? What about those? Do we have to choose either Pepsi or Coke? What about all these other options? What about fruit juice, for fuck's sake? Milk, water, coffee, tea. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy. It's an absolute limitation of the ability to think. It is limited and it is limiting. So, yeah, again, this kind of demonization of the other then leads to these kind of appeals to fear, where you can point at the Republicans do it too. It's not just the Democrats pointing at whoever the Republicans are running and calling them a fascist. And this shit's been going on since I was a kid, at least. I mean, even before that, back in the 30s and 40s, there was a Republican, Dewey, who was running against Roosevelt and kept insisting that Roosevelt was a Marxist. Okay? This is not something new. But you've got Republicans who accuse the Democrats of being the left. Fuck, the Democrats have never been a leftist party. Never, ever, ever. Just go look into their fucking history. Please. Honestly, look into it honestly. Don't read some shit from the John Birch Society or Pat Buchanan or some asswipe like that. Read an honest assessment from a neutral historian. The Democrats have never been a leftist party. Now, have there been individuals within the Democratic Party who were leftists? Yeah, sure, absolutely. Most of them have never had an elected office. Presidents? Hey, baby, even FDR was only a left-tinged centrist at first, and then toward the end of his life, he became more left-leaning centrist. Might have even been slightly leftist toward the end of his life, like from 1940 to, He moved a little bit more to the left, but I'm inclined to see him still as basically a centrist, if left-leaning, maybe slightly leftist. Maybe just a very minor leftist. But he certainly was a centrist when he was first elected president, when he introduced the New Deal. He didn't do that because he wanted to introduce socialism into this country. He did it to save capitalism. Read your history. Please, read your fucking history. Now, at the same time, you've got these people in the Democratic Party who insist that all the Republicans are fascists. And this has been going on since at least the time of Nixon. I mean, they were calling Nixon a fascist. Nixon wasn't a fascist. He was an authoritarian, but that's not what fascism means. Is fascism authoritarian? Yes. But not every authoritarian is a fascist, okay? Sorry, that's not how it works. Look. Fascists are authoritarian. Yeah, all fascists are authoritarian. But not all authoritarians are fascists. Maybe I can... The point is, fascism as a class exists completely within the class authoritarian. But authoritarian is larger than the class fascist, in that there are other kinds of authoritarians. There are people who are autocrats. There are people who are emperors. There are people who are, monarchists. There are people who are feudalists. There are people who are, religious fanatics who are authoritarian, but not necessarily fascist. Fascism is a very specific thing. It is a type of corporatism. It has social and political elements attached to it, but it's primarily an economic position, and that position is that it has either union or collusion between state and corporate power. But the point is, not everybody who is to the right of Franklin Roosevelt is a fascist. There are people who are just capitalists. There are people who are social democrats. And FDR himself was, in fact, a social democrat. The point is, you can't just point your finger at this person and say, that guy's a fascist. He has to actually be a fascist. Well, he's an authoritarian. Okay, that doesn't mean he's a fascist. Does he do this, and this? Then he might be a fascist. Probably is. But just being authoritarian? No, that's not what fascism is. Sorry to piss on your Cheerios or whatever, but no. Not everybody to the left of Reagan is a Marxist either. You've got Truman, Jack Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson. All of those guys were centrists, but they fought the communists. Now, why would they fight the communists if they were communists? Rivalry? No, that's not what happened here. They were actually adamantly opposed to communism. So don't be doing this kind of the Republicans pointing at every Democrat and saying, don't vote for that person because that person is a communist. That's fear-mongering. That's an appeal to fear. That's a logical fallacy. Democrats pointing at Republicans saying, don't vote for this person because this person is a fascist. No. Dwight David Eisenhower was a conservative and he was a capitalist, but he wasn't a fascist. He fought the fascists, for fuck's sake. Come on, people. Use your brain. Use your brain. This is fear-mongering. That's all it is. It's an appeal to fear. It's a logical fallacy. There's all this bullshit these people are spewing, and they're constantly trying to terrorize you into voting for their candidate by getting you to vote against, quote, the other, end quote, candidate, as if there aren't still candidates beyond those two options. Well, it's going to be one or the other. No, not necessarily. The Republicans were a third party once upon a time, and then 1860 happened, and suddenly they were not a third party anymore. They were one of the two main parties. There is such a thing as more than one. There is such a thing as more than two possibilities. There is also such a thing as nuance. There are authoritarian leftists and there are authoritarian right-wingers. There are also libertarian right-wingers and libertarian leftists. And by libertarian, I don't mean objectivist. I don't mean Ayn Rand followers, okay? That's not what libertarian originally meant. The Libertarian Party didn't even exist until December of 1971. They co-opted the name libertarian. Libertarian before that time in English-speaking societies, and still to this day in most English-speaking societies, meant a civil libertarian, someone who supports civil liberties, civil rights, human rights, constitutional rights, that kind of thing. The person who is opposed to authoritarianism. That's what libertarian used to mean, and still does for some people. That's why you have people who describe themselves as civil libertarians. That's why you have people who describe themselves as left libertarians. It doesn't mean they believe in laissez-faire capitalism. It doesn't mean they believe in deregulation. It doesn't mean they oppose labor unions. It means that they support civil liberties, civil rights, and human rights. They oppose authoritarianism. That's what it means. Now, there are some people who try to make a distinction by talking about capital L libertarians as members of the Libertarian Party and small L libertarians, by which they mean people who are inclined to vote for the Libertarian Party or support their ideas, but they're not members of the party. No. They're not libertarians, they're objectivists or they're neo-objectivists. And, honestly, I don't really see a lot of difference between objectivists and neo-objectivists. But Ayn Rand didn't endorse the Libertarian Party. She said they weren't representing her ideas faithfully. So when I say neo-objectivists, what I'm talking about are members of the Libertarian Party. And objectivists would be people who buy into Ayn Rand's bullshit but aren't members of the Libertarian Party. Libertarians, on the other hand, are people who support civil liberties, civil rights, human rights, oppose authoritarianism. That's what that means. There are more than just these four options as well. There are also centrists, all right? And some of them can be authoritarian and some of them can be libertarian. Some of them can be somewhere in between. There can be, that kind of midway point between authoritarianism and libertarianism on the left and on the right as well. That right there is at least 9 different options, and that's just taking them as if they were all specific points on a graph paper, as if they were all in the same little tiny point instead of a quadrant, right? It's more than 2-dimensional. It's more than 3-dimensional, because we even talk about let's see, the idea of, we're talking about the idea of civil authoritarianism versus civil libertarianism. We're talking about the idea of leftism versus right-wing, which is economic. We're also talking about the whole thing of polity and the concept of who has a voice in the making of decisions politically. So, if you have an autocracy, you've got one person making decisions for everyone else. That can be, an absolute monarch, for example, a dictator. If you have pure democracy, you've got a situation in which everyone has to agree in order for anything to get done. It's not a situation that can really exist, obviously. It might happen once in the bluest moon, like the second blue moon in a year, but don't count on it happening very often, which means nothing would ever get done, really. Even what we would consider to be a pure democracy isn't really a pure democracy, because in most cases it's, majority or supermajority rules. And we can go on beyond that. We can go on to attitudes toward change in society and or culture, which would be things that range from radical through progressive and liberal, limousine liberal, moderate, conservative, ultra-conservative, regressive, reactionary. These are not, they don't correspond with the economic perspectives. Radical doesn't mean leftist necessarily. There's certainly radical leftists, but there are radical corporatists too. All this has to do with radical, and this spectrum from radical to reactionary. All that has to do with is how you view change in society. Are you for it or are you against it? Right? Do you want to do it cautiously? Do you want to do it rapidly? Do you want to do it for a specific purpose? How are you going to approach it? Is it going to be top down or is it going to be grassroots? All of these, and we can go on beyond that. And I've got an entire series of articles, 2 of which are already published. One is published, but it shouldn't be. I accidentally hit publish before I was finished with it, and that was sometime in the middle of last year, and I still haven't finished it. I hadn't intended to publish it, but I mean, if you go to my blog, you can have a look at it. What is there now? Anyway, there are. In the first article, I went on to like I think 7 dimensions, not just 1, not just 2, not just 3, but 7. In the second article, I think I went on to 19 in that one. And in the third article, which is probably going to wind up being 2 more articles because it's already long enough now to form an entire article on its own, and it's not even halfway finished. In that one, I go on to 33 dimensions, and I tell you about going beyond that as well. But I'm probably never going to do that because it would be one hell of an undertaking and would probably require more time than I have to, even think about. And it would probably also drive me quite insane because we're talking about the only way I could begin to represent it in visual, form would be to take a Platonic solid unit and take a Platonic solid and then tessellate Euclidean space so that you wind up with some kind of it's something that drives geometers or whatever quite batty, and I'm not really a geometrist, so no, I'll pass on that. I'm going to stick with the 33 that I've got, and at the same time admitting that there are more out there. I just don't want to have to try to come up with what they all are. The point is that there are all these different things that come together to form any given person's perspective. So you can't put everyone into 2 tiny little boxes and expect them to fit. It's like you can't put a square peg into a round hole or vice versa. I mean, you can force it maybe, but that's not, there used to be this kind of thing that we valued as, enlightenment people that were living in a society that was based on Enlightenment values and ideals, and that was the idea that you don't have to conform to someone else's expectations. You're free to be yourself. Okay, now there's certain social norms and legal, whatnot, but uniformity is not the same thing as unity. Okay, and a lot of people get those things confused. I don't have to agree with every fucking thing you have in your head in order to be, in your political party. I mean, I'm a Green, and I don't agree with everything in the Green Party platform. I agree with it more than I agree with the Democratic Party platform or the Republican Party platform or the Libertarian Party platform. Yeah, a lot more than I agree with any of those. But that doesn't mean I agree with it 100%. And I don't have to. This is another thing that we get a lot of from the Democrats, this bullshit about purity tests that they always throw at progressives. No, man, it's not about a purity test. It's not about someone who has to agree with us 100%. I didn't agree with Bernie 100%, but I voted for him in the primary, and I probably would have voted for him in the general election if he had won the Democratic nomination. I didn't agree with Jill Stein 100%, but I voted for her. Huh? I've never agreed 100% with a candidate that I voted for, but I picked the one that I agreed with the most. And as I was saying earlier, it's not about personality. There's this cult of personality that's built up around Bernie Sanders, and if you criticize him in any way, you're suddenly persona non grata to those people that are in that little cult of personality. Bernie is their savior, and he himself denied that. I'm not your savior, he said. If you're looking for anyone, any person to come and save you, that's not me. That's not Bernie Sanders. That's not anybody. Nobody can do that. You have to save yourselves. Jill Stein said, it's in our hands. Okay? It wasn't like we're going to find somebody to deliver us from this dystopian hellhole that we're living in, this nightmare that the Republicans and Democrats have visited upon us. It's we have to deliver ourselves. It's also not about party, as I think I've just made plain by pointing out that I don't agree 100% with the Green Party platform. I mean, I certainly agree with more than half of it. But getting back to this whole concept of purity tests, it was never about Hillary simply being flawed or imperfect. Nobody is perfect. Nobody is perfect. The only person I could ever vote for and agree with 100% would be my fucking self. Okay? I mean, I doubt very seriously there's another human being on the face of the earth with whom I could agree on everything imaginable. Could you? Be honest. I don't think you could. Anyway, it was never about Hillary being pure. It was about Hillary supporting even half, even 51% of what of our ideals, you know, and she didn't. And who could tell what she supported anyway, because she had a public and a private position. Oh, and let's go on. We know what she actually supported because we've seen her record. Now we've got Democrats who are getting themselves bent out of shape because we're looking into the record of Beto O'Rourke and Kamala Harris and Cory Booker, and they're like, those are personal attacks. No, they're not fucking personal attacks, dumbass. I just called you a dumbass. That's a personal attack. Okay? That's a personal attack. If I call you ugly or stupid, that's a personal attack. If I look at something someone has voted for in the past, that's not a personal attack. That's me looking at their record. That's me looking at their policies. That's me looking at what they stand for and what they don't stand for. So, I mean, we can look all the way back to the Rose Law Firm for Hillary Clinton. It's not just about her senatorial career. It's not just about her being Secretary of State. She was also First Lady of the United States. She was First Lady of Arkansas. There's a long record for Hillary to look at. And as far as Cory Booker and Kamala Harris and Kirsten Gillibrand and Beto O'Rourke, you know, we were already looking at that before there were any, you know, I mean, back in 2016, we already knew who Cory Booker was and who Kamala Harris was and who Kirsten Gillibrand was. We knew who they were. This is not some new thing. We'd already looked into their... And Liz Warren, she had a lot of us fooled for a while there, but before the primaries were over, I think most of us had realized that she was not what she pretended to be. So Liz Warren is a Fauxgressive opportunist. She's not a progressive. She might have some progressive ideals, but I don't trust her. And that's another issue. The thing is not person. It's not personality. Okay? I've voted for people I don't like because I thought they would do a good job, even though I disliked the person. It's not just about, it's not about party either. You know, parties are not perfect either. I don't vote for a person based on their personality, and I don't vote for a person based on what party they're a member of. I vote for them based on their policies, their ideals, and their character does play a role in that as well. Again, I don't trust Liz Warren. I don't trust Hillary Clinton. So that has to do with their character. I don't find them trustworthy. But in those two cases, it's also about policy. Liz Warren does a lot of grandstanding. She makes a lot of noise. She sounds good sometimes. But look at what she votes for and what she votes against. That's how you make your decision. It's not about purity. How ridiculous. My boyfriend is going to accuse me of chasing rabbits if he watches this video, because he does. And I do chase rabbits, but in this case I think everything that I've said was entirely justified, and I don't think he's heard all of this before like he will say he has. And I mean, he's heard a lot of my rants several times, I will admit. But anyway, I don't want this video to be exceptionally long. Okay, so speaking of Liz Warren, our next article comes from Common Dreams. Next article comes from Common Dreams, and it was published on January the 28th, 2019. I'm not really sure who wrote it, but anyway, it can't be Warren and it can't be Sanders. Wall Street executives make 2020 preferences known. The first 2020 Democratic presidential primary is still over a year away, but Wall Street executives are reportedly already freaking out about two likely progressive candidates, Senators Elizabeth Warren, Democrat of Massachusetts, and Bernie Sanders, Independent of Vermont. Again, nothing progressive about Liz. I mean, like I said, she may hold some progressive views. She may have some progressive values, but I really regard her as more of an opportunist than anything else, and it's for that reason that I can't trust her. Bernie Sanders, on the other hand, yeah, he's got a very long history that goes back to the 60s. He's been consistent throughout until the latter half of 2016, when he kind of, and who knows, as I said before, who knows what motivated him to, anyway. The CEO of a giant bank anonymously told Politico, which reported on Monday that Wall Street executives are getting panicked about the potential prospects of the Senate's two fiercest financial sector critics, quote, "It can't be Warren and it can't be Sanders," end quote. And then it goes on, quote, "The best indication of who you should vote for in the Democratic primary if you actually want progressive policy is who Wall Street doesn't like, which essentially means Bernie or Warren," end quote, according to Josh Mound, a journalist. Well, no. I mean, no. I'd say Bernie or Tulsi. But Bernie hasn't declared yet, hasn't even announced an exploratory committee, so who knows? And I mean, like I said, I don't watch the Super Bowl. I don't know what's going on today. Haven't looked at any news since I started doing this recording. So, so continue with the article. Warren launched an exploratory committee for president last month, vowing to take on the corruption that is, quote, "poisoning our democracy," end quote. Sanders, for his part, has yet to publicly announce a bid for the White House, but Yahoo News reported on Friday that the Vermont senator plans to launch his campaign imminently. Both, it calls them progressive senators, have placed scrutiny on Wall Street's size, record of large-scale fraud, exorbitant CEO pay packages, enormous political influence, and lack of stringent regulations at the center of their political agendas for years, and deep-pocketed bankers who have profited immensely from President Donald Trump's tenure are worried that one of the two could ascend to the White House and threaten their pocketbooks. Politico reported that, quote, bankers' biggest fear, end quote, is that the 2020 Democratic presidential, quote, nomination goes to an anti-Wall Street crusader, end quote, like Warren or Sanders. Politico noted, quote, "The result is a kind of nervous paralysis of executives pining for a centrist nominee like Michael Bloomberg." Jesus Christ. See, they have no idea what centrist means, do they? They really don't. End quote. Anyway. And it goes on. Let's see here. Is there anything else in here worth pulling out? Wall Street executives who want Trump out of the White House mentioned, quote, a consistent roster of appealing nominees, end quote, they would find acceptable, blah, 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 blah. And the outlet described Michael Bloomberg as Wall Street's, quote, platonic ideal, end quote. Oh, Plato, you should not, you should not blaspheme Plato's name like that. Anyway, this roster reportedly included Democratic Senators Cory Booker, New Jersey, Kirsten Gillibrand, New York, and Kamala Harris, California, former Vice President Joe Biden, and former Representative Beto O'Rourke, Democrat from Texas. See, and all of these people, we've looked into their records, and, their records. Not their personalities, not their character. I mean, so in some cases, yeah. Looked into their character as well. But looking at their record and pointing out what they've done, that's not a personal attack. That's what you're supposed to do. So blah, 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 blah. As CNBC reported earlier this month, Harris, Booker, and Gillibrand have all reached out to Wall Street to gauge support for 2020 campaigns. That ought to tell you all you need to know right there about those three. And as far as Beto or Robert Francis O'Rourke, yeah, the guy is a member of the New Democrat Coalition, which is a successor of the Democratic Leadership Council. That is, it's a neoliberal think tank kind of group. It's the Clintonite wing of the Democratic Party. It's that kind of, the people who call themselves centrists because they've wedded fiscal conservatism to social liberalism. And you're not fooling anybody, guys. Fiscal conservatism is economic liberalism. That's what it's always been known as. Back in the 1920s, classical liberalism, the economic aspects thereof taken to extremes under Harding and Coolidge and Hoover, that's what neoliberalism looks back to. That's right-wing. That is extreme right-wing economics. Those were unsustainable extremes, and there were necessary factors in the Great Depression that caused the Great Depression. Not alone, right? There were other factors as well, but those were certainly, if those things had not been going on, if those people had not been pushing those unsustainable, extreme right-wing economic policies and passing those laws and signing them into law, then yeah, we might have been able to avoid the Great Depression. You're mixing social liberalism, or at least lip service to social liberalism, with economic liberalism, which is right-wing economics. That's not centrism. Centrism is social democracy. You know what social democracy is? It's a mixed economy. It has some elements of capitalism and some elements of socialism. So, again, don't call these people centrists. They're not centrists. What the fuck? I would like to know who wrote this article. Give that person a piece of my mind. Anyway, one executive who Politico described as a hedge fund manager of God and a top Democratic donor declared, quote, if it's Biden and Beto or Biden and Harris, that might make a difference. The good news for Biden is everyone likes him. What fucking planet is this guy on? Everyone likes Biden. Who likes Biden, man? Seriously. Wall Street executives maybe, but not everyone. Anyway, he continued, the bad news is that there is not a lot of passion, end quote. No shit. And that's what we had with Al Gore back in 2000. Personality of a dead fish. And on top of that, Biden is kind of touchy-feely. A lot of people have this kind of perception of Joe Biden as kind of a little creepy Uncle Joe kind of dude. I don't know if that's true or not, but he's certainly... There's some video and photographs of him where he's, he looks a little touchy-feely. This article is, if you want to look at it, I will include a link in the video description. And speaking of, the next article, now this one comes from Actify Press. These, I think they're all women, young ladies, have a YouTube channel, and I've had some interactions with them on Twitter. Not always, not always in agreement, but yeah, they're relatively passionate, at least. So this article was published 6 days ago, and I printed it on the 1st of February this year, and so it was posted. Published 6 days ago on their website, but originally posted back in 2018, 24th of April, by Tina Desiree Berg. New York State Senate IDC. With Democrats like these, who needs Republicans? New York's the Independent Democratic Conference, or IDC, is a group of 8 New York Democrat state senators who caucus with Republicans. So you mean they're like most Democrats then? Founded in 2011, the New York State Senate IDC's aim is to thwart banking and financial regulation, tax increases on the wealthy, and other progressive policies. They, along with their GOP partners, serve the moneyed donor class and not their constituents. So they're like other Democrats. Really? I mean, seriously, come on. Seriously. The Democratic Party establishment this is what they are down the line. Some of them, like I said, some of them talk nice and sound good and do a little bit of grandstanding, but when the shit hits the fan, what are they actually going to vote for and against? Pay attention, people, not to the rhetoric, but to the deeds. In fact, they have an actual power sharing agreement with the Republican leadership. Given this, they might as well be Republicans, which raises the question: why do they still run as Democrats? So this is a pretty good, interesting article here, and I recommend it. You can go check out the Actify Press YouTube channel as well. They do some interesting stuff there. There is at least one of them with whom I probably am generally more in agreement than one of the others. People don't always have to agree on everything, and that's fine. But I think the big issue we had, that one young lady and myself, was over the question of what is the central struggle. And she seemed to think that I was willing to completely ignore racism and sexism and homophobia and transphobia and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, no, I'm not ignoring it. I'm saying that none of that will ever be dealt with in more than a temporary and token fashion until we address the structures which facilitate and enable oppression. And those structures are economic in nature and largely capitalist. So, I mean, that's the class struggle is the way to go. We need solidarity, and this identity politics is divisive, which is, kind of the antithesis of solidarity. So, I mean, no, seriously, go and check out their YouTube channel. They're good kids and stuff. And, I mean, I say kids, they're not children. They're, I mean, to me, they're kids because I'm not a kid. I'm in my 50s, and so let me see now. I've got a few more, just a few more articles I need to go through here. We're gonna, we were talking a little earlier about censorship and fake news and propaganda and so forth. So the next article that I have comes from CNBC, and it's about Twitter. This was published on the 1st of February. It's by Tucker Higgins. Twitter suspends anti-Kamala Harris accounts suspected of being trolls. Twitter this week suspends at least 2 accounts. From the title, it sounds like it's a big bunch of people because, I mean, Twitter and Facebook have this reputation of going on mass banning sprees or suspending sprees or whatever, and taking out large numbers of people that are suspected of being trolls or bots or, whatever. Certainly there was the case sometime late last year of Facebook banning, I think it was 600 or 6,000, I forget now the exact number, but certainly a relatively large number of accounts on the recommendation of the Atlantic Council. And I talked about what the Atlantic Council is and who's on the board there. Former CIA director, former NSA director, Henry fucking Kissinger. People from Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, the military-industrial complex. This is what you got. Neoconservative think tank is what the Atlantic Council is. So Facebook, with Mark Zuckerberg, who's supposedly this great liberal Democrat, is letting the Atlantic Council tell him who he should suspend from Facebook. Oh, boy. Yeah. But anyway, so this is Twitter. Twitter this week suspends at least 2 accounts suspected of troll-like behavior targeting presidential contender Senator Kamala Harris of California, as well as other Democratic candidates. The accounts were created recently and had few followers, but they posted easily shareable content about the senator's record as a prosecutor that earned an outsized audience on the platform. I mean, it's her record. What? It's her fucking record. They didn't make it up. She did it. This is all verifiable, and we can go back into stuff that was written several years ago and find out. I mean, I'm going to be reading some. I mean, I read some stuff. I think it was last week or the week before. That was, yeah. I mean, come on. And some of that was from several years ago. Anyway, one of these accounts claims to belong to a black man in the South who opposes Harris and supports Senator Bernie Sanders, who is exploring a presidential run of his own. That account, at Willis Germain, was created in November 2018 and tweeted about 500 times before it was suspended on Wednesday. Another account Twitter suspended was at Kamala, which the company suggested violated Twitter's rules against impersonation. Kamala. Okay, so Kamala. Okay, Kamala? That's impersonating Kamala. Come on, guys, get real. Come on. That's like suspending Peter Douche and claiming that he was impersonating Peter Dow when the profile plainly stated that it was a parody account. And, you know, I mean, Peter Douche? Come on, guys. Nobody buys this. You silenced someone, or tried to. Didn't work out too well for you, though, did it? Because he's still around, and you know it. And he's got enough attention now that you can't really get away with it the way you did the first time. You ought to restore his original account and stop being assholes, Jack. Anyway, so this account, Kamala, was created in January. These suspensions mark an early test of the social media platform as it wrestles with the fallout of the last presidential race. Twitter has been criticized for not doing enough to stem disinformation posted by fake accounts during the 2016 race, including those that were part of a targeted campaign by the Russian government. No. There's never been any evidence that the Internet Research Agency has any connection to the Russian government whatsoever. Show me the fucking evidence. I've asked for it. What, you gonna show me that shit from the Joint Intelligence report back in November of 2016? How about former Director Clapper's barrel of laughs in January of 2017. Is that the evidence? No. There's no fucking evidence there that has stood up to any kind of rational scrutiny. I mean, it's been subjected to logical analysis by IT experts, by antivirus developers, by former intelligence veterans. No, it's bullshit. It's absolute bullshit. The first one is just a bunch of crap. And the second one is, I mean, the first one actually gives you what supposedly is evidence, but it's all been debunked already. The second one is just Clapper going, "Whoa, man, RT, they reported on alternative energy sources and they talked bad about petroleum and they let fucking Jill Stein come on and they interviewed her. Oh my God!" Well, so, you know what I mean? What's the problem? Did MSNBC ask Jill Stein on? No. Did any of the mainstream media in the United States give Jill Stein half of a blink? Not really, no. Jill Stein got her media coverage from independent media and from external media, media in other countries. Well, it's a Russian agency. No, I mean, you guys keep saying this, but yet there's Abby Martin who criticized Russia and Putin over the Crimea invasion. She continued to work for RT for a year after that and left of her own volition. Doesn't sound like it's all that state-controlled to me. I'm sorry to disabuse you of that notion, too. Not really. I'm not sorry to disabuse you of that notion at all. Use your fucking brains. Seriously, stop listening to these fucking idiots lying to you, trying to terrorize you into voting for Hillary or Hillary 2.0. It ain't gonna happen. No, I'm not telling you to vote for Trump either. By God, don't. Don't vote for Trump either. But, there are other alternatives. That's the point I'm trying to make. There are other alternatives. There's not just X and Y. There's Z and A and B and gamma and delta and epsilon and theta and phi, chi, psi, omega. All of these other, I mean, come on. A, B, C, D, A, F, G, and all that stuff. There's so many other options. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's so many other options. It's not just X and Y. There's all these other options to choose from. Baskin Robbins, 30 wonderful flavors, guys. Come on. You do have other options in the primaries, and even in the general election, there will be, at least if if things continue as they have, and certain. The bill that I talked about, I think it was last week, if that bill doesn't pass, and has very little chance of doing so, then there will be 4 candidates, at least 4 candidates in 2020 running in the general election who will be on the ballot in a sufficient number of states that they could conceivably win enough electoral votes to win the presidency. So, you have probably at least 4 options come November 2020. Don't limit yourselves, and please don't limit the rest of us either to these 2 idiots. And I mean, I don't know who's going to win the Democratic nomination. I mean, there's certainly some clear indications that Kamala is the anointed one of the Democratic Party establishment. She's already got at least 1 superdelegate in her pocket, but that doesn't mean that she's going to win. And hopefully she doesn't. Hopefully she doesn't. Because she is a cop. And, there are reasons why that's bad. I mean, I went into some detail. Tim Black has talked about it. Jimmy Dore has talked about it. Jamal Thomas has talked about it. Nico Haas has talked about it. Her record. Her record, people. Not a personal attack. To look at her record and see what she has done in the past and get an idea of what she might do as president. That's not a personal attack. That's what you're supposed to do. Oh, she's pretty. Okay, I'm bisexual, but, I'm not going to say she's ugly, but I don't find her all that attractive myself. But so what if she's pretty? I mean, Tulsi Gabbard is pretty. Jill Stein is pretty. I mean, there are other, come on. She's pretty? That's your excuse for voting for her? Jeez. I despair sometimes of, we have serious issues facing our country and the world, and you're going to vote for somebody because she's pretty? Come on, seriously. Look at the record. Find out what the person stands for, what they've done in the past. That's what you're supposed to vote for someone or against someone based on. Don't just vote for someone because you don't want someone else to win. Vote for the person you want. Stop voting against what you don't want and start voting for what you do want. Novel concept, huh? It used to not be. Anyway, so this is supposedly part of a targeted campaign supposedly by the Russian government to stoke tensions around race and other matters. And yet, the people that they say were being supported by the Russian government, Bernie Sanders, a man who says identity politics is divisive? Wow. At the same time, Twitter has said it supports the free speech of its users. Yeah, okay. This article goes on a little longer, another couple pages. So, it's not as bad as may not be as bad as the article title suggests. It may have just been a couple of accounts, but still, it gives you pause. It gives me pause anyway. Well, let's go on, and since we're talking about Kamala and her record, this next article comes from Canada Free Press. Yes, this comes from Canada Free Press. It's by Kathy Grimes. It was published on September 18th, 2018. So this is not a new thing. This is before she announced that she was running, before she announced that she was going to form an exploratory committee. Back in September, this article was written. Kamala Harris, it says, Kamala's misplaced priorities. Kamala Harris covered up for San Francisco Archdiocese sex abuse. More than 8 years ago, in 2010, Kamala Harris, then San Francisco District Attorney, was running for California Attorney General, and for some reason, her record of covering up sex abuse records belonging to the San Francisco Archdiocese was never part of the political news of her record. Today, Harris is a United States Senator with an eye for running for president in 2020. Now, we knew that she was thinking about it back in 2016. We did. I mean, if anybody was paying attention, you can go back. While Google Plus is still alive, go look at my account over there and you'll see we were talking about her back in 2016 and how we expected her to want to run for president come 2020. And so here we are, right, in 2019, and she's declared. Anyway, she was San Francisco District Attorney from 2003 until her election in 2010 to State Attorney General. Reporter Matt Smith at San Francisco Weekly reported in 2010 that Harris rebuffed reporters' efforts for 5 years to view her office's files on Catholic clergy sex abuse under the State Public Records Act, despite statements by former San Francisco DA Terrence Hallinan saying that they should be released. The files in question involved the San Francisco Archdiocese files on clergy abuse and contained details of how the church dealt internally with alleged pederast, homosexual, and pedophile priests going back as far as 80 years. According to a second SF Weekly article, Cardinal William Levada was Archbishop of San Francisco until 2005. So, I mean, this article goes on, and it's worth you looking at if you really want to vet your candidates and know who they are and what they stand for and what their record is. You can't just vote for someone. I mean, you can just vote for someone based on their physical appearance if you're going to be that fucking shallow. But, the rest of the world and the rest of the country are going to be saddled with your poor decision making. Okay, so anyway, speaking of Democratic Party candidates for the nomination, let's see. We also have Cory Booker has announced that he's going to run for president. He announced on I believe the 1st of February. So our next article comes to us from Jacobin magazine. And this is by Joseph Franchek, and it was published. It was from January 2017. So it's over 2 years old now. This is an article from 2 years ago, 2 years and a month ago. Cory Booker's Conscience by Joseph Franchek. Cory Booker is no courageous senator. He's Big Pharma's favorite Democrat. Cory Booker's in the news, but of course he is. New Jersey's junior senator used to live in Newark, but these days he seems to live in some alternate cyber reality, coursing through a circuit of cable wire that runs from news media outlet to news media outlet and social media platform to social media platform, allowing Booker to jack himself into digitized view at a moment's notice. He's the high-tech entrepreneur senator, superhero of the future, from the future, for the future, say, circa 2020. He's in the news this week for half his day's work, Wednesday. During the Senate Judiciary Committee's hearing on Donald Trump's nominee for Attorney General, Senator Jeff Sessions of Alabama, Booker testified that Sessions lacks the, quote, courageous empathy, end quote, needed for the position. Helpfully for Booker's media profile, Republican senators chastised him for breaking with the collegial custom of the Senate to refrain from speaking out against a fellow senator in a hearing. This allowed Booker to state publicly how seriously he deliberated on his decision to break with the Senate's stodgy cronyism. Booker called this accurately, quote, Senate norms, end quote. Booker assured us, quote, I do not take lightly the decision to testify against a Senate colleague, but the immense powers of the Attorney General combined with the deeply troubling views of this nominee is a call to conscience, end quote. And yeah, I mean, I'm going to agree with him. Jeff Sessions should never have been in that position. Really, he should never have been Attorney General. But this isn't really about Jeff Sessions. This is about Cory Booker. And so let's go on and see. Goody goody. Tom Cotton had to bloviate about something here. But he actually pointed out the obvious, according to the article, and I guess, it was, that this was political theater, a precursor to the act to be staged in 2020. The New York Times accentuated instead Booker's case against Sessions, which hinged on Sessions' anti-voting rights and anti-immigration record. Slate gushed, astonished that Booker would be so courageous as to, quote, step into the Klieg lights to talk about uncomfortable racial truths, end quote. Whatever the slant, coverage of Senator Booker's stand was everywhere come Thursday morning. Indeed, by Wednesday evening, before he even finished his long day by voting past 11 at night on an amendment, quote, to establish a deficit-neutral reserve fund relating to lower prescription drug prices for Americans by importing drugs from Canada, end quote. Quietly, Booker voted nay. He tweeted many times Wednesday about his testimony against Sessions. One was simply a quotation from, yes, Martin Luther King, on the importance of refusing to remain silent. But @Cory Booker was a little slower to tweet about his vote against a measure that would allow for cheaper importation of prescription drugs. And when he did, the defensiveness, the damage control, was all too apparent. Bernie Sanders was quicker to tweet on the same amendment. He wrote, quote, literally, there are thousands of people who die every single year because they cannot afford the medicine they need. That's outrageous, end quote. Work on your tweeting skills, Senator. That tweet had 136 characters, far too long, not nearly as punchy as Booker's feed. Quote, in the cause of justice, never stay silent just so that others can remain comfortable, end quote. Self-righteous, ridiculously reductive, short and saccharine sweet. Sanders was one of the forces behind the amendment introduced by Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota. Most Democrats voted for the measure, from Klobuchar's fellow Minnesotan Al Franken to Elizabeth Warren. 12 Republicans supported the amendment. These were mostly the self-styled sane grown-ups of the GOP caucus, like Susan Collins and John McCain. But the yeas also included Rand Paul and even Ted Cruz. The amendment would have passed, and people's prescription drugs would have cost less if not for the nay votes of 13 Democratic senators. These included those of the Great Plains Blue Dogs John Tester and Heidi Heitkamp, who recently entertained the idea of joining Donald Trump's cabinet. Joe Manchin, who entertained the same idea, voted in favor of Klobuchar's amendment. Booker voted nay. The amendment failed 46 to 52. Booker is a corporate liberal whose solidly pro-business economic commitments might have led him to seek a home in the GOP if it weren't for the party's refusal to let go of its troglodytic stances on social issues. The best evidence of this is from 2012, when he took to meet the press, supposedly as President Obama's surrogate, yet Booker used his time to attack Obama for attacking Mitt Romney's time at the private equity firm Bain Capital. In the most remarkable false equivalency wizardry of the 2012 campaign, Booker said then, quote, the last point I'll make is this kind of stuff is nauseating to me on both sides. It's nauseating to the American public. Enough is enough. Stop attacking private equity. Stop attacking Jeremiah Wright, end quote. And there's another article that was from the Guillaume Journal, Théodore Ficre did about Cory Booker, private equity in the sheets and public equity in the streets, or something like that. And I posted that in my Discord earlier this evening, so those of you who are in the Discord can check it out. It's in the News and Stuff channel. And those of you who are subscribers and aren't in the Discord, hey, now's your chance. There will be a link to join my Discord in the video description. It's a free program. It's a free download. There's no fees unless you want to get little extra perks, by getting Discord Nitro. You don't have to pay to join the Discord. You don't have to pay me. You don't have to pay Discord. The only thing you might have to pay for is, if you want to get Discord Nitro, which you may or may not be able to use all of those features in my server depending on what your role is. Also, there might be some, charge for the data you use in downloading the program. It's a very fast download. It's a very small program, so it's not that big a deal. Perhaps Booker could now update this line for 2017, quote, "Stop attacking the pharmaceutical industry," end quote. Liberals have spent this winter season shouting at the left to remember that they are not the real enemy. And in the light of day, Cory Booker is fighting the good fight and testifying against Sessions, albeit with vague and tepid words about how troubling his record is. But after dark, he's voting down Sanders's and Klobuchar's attempt to provide some shelter for the sick against the wolves from the pharmaceutical industry. After hours, extra work is the least Booker could provide the pharmaceutical industry. According to the nonpartisan nonprofit MapLight, the only senators who received more of the industry's largesse are Orrin Hatch and Mitch McConnell, Cory Booker's Big Pharma's favorite Democrat. He's just about its favorite senator. Certainly his favor with the pharmaceuticals must have never been better than Wednesday night. However, one wonders how fearful are the pharmaceuticals now after Booker has tweeted some words of noble defiance. Thursday, he explained on Twitter that really he voted with McConnell and Hatch because Sanders and Klobuchar hadn't gone far enough. Okay. Right. After one sympathetic Twitter user questioned Booker about his vote, he assured them, quote, "We need much more action than this," end quote. Then he assured her, quote, "I will fight for this," end quote. Okay, Cory. Okay, buddy. We don't believe you. Fuck off. But wait. There's more. Oh, goodness gracious, is there ever more? Now, unfortunately, like I said, I don't want to go too long, and I'm already up to over 3 hours, it looks like. I'm going to skip these other two articles that I have about Cory Booker, and unfortunately, they're very good articles, but I don't want to be here all night, and I don't want to do another 6 hours thing like I did last week, or the week before last, rather. So one of them is from, I think this one was from 2016, maybe. It's from Real Progressives, full disclosure, I am on the leadership team. I'm part of the project management office of Real Progressives. But this one is by Diane Moxley, who's a Green Party candidate last year. And it's called Cory Booker, If I Gave Back All My Big Pharma Donations, Would You Be Happy? Even if I were going to read all of this, I wouldn't read all of it because it includes a transcript of a discussion. And it's a very, very interesting and very revealing article. I highly, highly urge you to go and read it. I will include a link to it in the references wherever they wind up being. The other article comes from Grit Post, and it's basically Cory Booker weakening public schools. The article is called "Cory Booker Once Gave a Keynote Speech at an event hosted by Betsy DeVos organization." So, I mean, yeah. Cory Booker is not a progressive. He's not even a liberal. So don't be fooled. Okay, so now I do want to end up here. I've got two more articles. These are relatively brief. They will both be included in the video references. And these are both science posts. I'm going to just read the articles and not the actual studies, but I'm going to include link to the studies themselves as well, so you can check those out. The study of this first one is called Intellectual, Narcissistic, or Machiavellian, How Twitter Users Differ from Facebook-Only Users, blah, 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 blah. And there will be a link to that study, as well as a link to this article talking about it, which comes from SciPost.org. And this was published on the 29th of January, 2019 by Eric W. Dolan. Twitter users are higher in openness and Machiavellianism than Facebook users. Probably not going to read all of this because the next article, I want to get to some good news instead of, focusing on these horrible candidates. So far, the only real good news that I have given you is that Tulsi Gabbard is running for president, or for the Democratic nomination for president. And this is an interesting article to me because I noticed something rather interesting whenever I didn't have a Twitter account until midway through 2017. I got it because I wanted to promote my YouTube channel, and while I now have over 1,000 followers on Twitter, I still have less than 200 subscribers here on this YouTube channel. Maybe it's because I do 4-hour-long videos and 6-hour-long streams. I don't know. No, these are not very common, actually. Most of my streams are 2.5 hours at max, and most of my videos are 15 to 45 minutes. So, I mean, it's not really that bad, but this is kind of a news show. So, I mean, if you were watching BBC News Night or CBS News Overnight or whatever it's called, that goes on for 3 hours and then repeats. So, I mean, on CBS, I don't know about BBC. Anyway. And Twitter users tended to be more open-minded than people who only use Facebook, according to new research published in the journal Psychology of Popular Media Culture. The study also found that Twitter users tended to be more Machiavellian as well. So, and I was saying, I didn't have a Twitter account until the middle of 2017. I got it to promote my YouTube channel. I guess it maybe has gotten me some additional subscribers, but not as many as I had hoped, obviously. This is not a thing about self-aggrandizement or me feeling important by having a lot of subscribers or whatever. It's that I have ideas that I would like to get out there. I would like to make a difference, and this is a way that I think I might be able to do it. I mean, certainly, as I've said in my credits whenever I have them, there are certain individuals who have inspired me to believe that I too can have a voice and can make a difference. That's what I want to do. I would like to make a difference. I would like to help people come to understand some things that maybe they haven't been exposed to before. I talk about philosophy. I talk about history. I talk about logic quite a lot. I talk about ideas. These are things in which I have formal training. I mean, my degree, my bachelor's degree is a double major in philosophy and religion. My master's work was in theology. I have a very pregnant bachelor's degree, not simply a double major, but a rather large number of electives in history and English and modern and ancient languages and music, and a few other fields. But anyway, part of it was because I changed my major a couple of times, and then wound up keeping one of the majors and adding another instead of dropping it entirely. And also because there was a lot of stuff I wanted to study. I was very interested and very curious. I had this kind of fascination with trying to learn as much as possible about as many different things as possible. So I stayed beyond 4 years, obviously. Study author Tara C. Marshall of Brunel University, London, said, quote, I wanted to know why people use Twitter when Facebook is so ubiquitous. Does Twitter gratify needs, e.g., to promote one's career, that Facebook doesn't, end quote. She goes on, quote, second, I wanted to know why people tweet about the things they do. Why do some people tweet about politics, research findings, or the arts, while others tweet about more personal topics? How much do they like reading others' tweets about these topics, end quote. The study found certain personality traits were associated with using Twitter, in particular openness to experience and Machiavellian traits were both positively associated with the likelihood of being a Twitter user. The researchers surveyed 569 people who were both Facebook and Twitter users, 516 people who were users of Facebook but not Twitter, and 32 people who were users of Twitter but not Facebook. The latter seems a rather small sample, but anyway. So anyway, this article goes on, and it's kind of basically a summary or a discussion of the findings of the study. As I was saying, and have said at least twice now, I didn't have a Twitter account until mid-2017, and I didn't want one because I had this kind of thing about Twitter, with its character limit that used to be, 186 or whatever, 180 characters, whatever it was. I found that to be oppressive, and I thought it was, and I still do think that it was contributing to the degradation of our language, not just our language, but other languages as well, along with text messaging, which, until they started introducing things like unlimited talk and text, you wanted to express yourself in as few characters as possible, and so you would start abbreviating the word you as just the letter U, and your as you are, and let's see, other things like people as PPL, and stuff like that, and it rubbed me the wrong way. I don't like it at all. I mean, I understand the need for shorthand in certain contexts, right? But yeah, I don't think it's a good thing. I mean, it's also tending towards encouraging even less attention, it's less patience, and sort of more of this kind of attention deficit thing. That, along with sound bites that you get on the news, where they don't actually cover full stories, but give you, just a little brief statement about something, and then move on to the next item. Well, you're not going to get that here, obviously. I'm doing a 4-hour stream, right? It's probably going to be 4 hours by the time I'm done. Yeah. Oh no, maybe not. And I've got one more article here that I thought was very interesting. Also, from SciPost, sorry. But before I go on with this one, so I didn't have a Facebook account either until about the middle of last year, 2018. And the only reason I got it was to keep in touch with family members who weren't on Twitter and weren't on Google+. See, I've had Google+ since it became a thing. I always preferred Google+ to MySpace or Facebook or Twitter. It's just a much better social media platform. And the fact that they are phasing out the consumer version of Google+ tells me that, yeah, they can solve the privacy issues because they're going to keep it for corporations. They're going to have a corporate version of Google Plus now. You're going to have to pay to use it, and it's not an inexpensive thing to do. It's not a cheap arrangement that they've got set up. So they want to make some money. I mean, they're a corporation. That's what they do. But the fact is, if they're going to keep it for corporations, that means they could fix the privacy issues in the consumer version, but they don't want to because it's not profitable for them. They claim that most people who use Google Plus are only there for a few seconds or a few minutes. That has not been my experience. I know some very dedicated users of Google+. I mean, they maybe not spend as much time on it as people spend on Facebook, as I've noticed now that I'm there, because Facebook has this annoying habit of popping shit up in your face. when you're on your computer. If you're on a Facebook page, they'll pop up Facebook Messenger in your face. They'll pop up replies to your posts and other Facebook groups and shit in your face. There's a little notification bar up there, guys. I don't need this stuff popping up in front of my face. I might be trying to type something. I don't want your crap in my way. I want to do what I'm doing. I'll look at my notifications later. I don't need this popping up in my face. If you're on a phone, it's even worse. Oh my God. Everything, the Facebook Messenger posts will pop up right in front of you, whatever you're doing, whether you're on a Facebook page or not. It just pops right up there. The only way to disable that is to disable notifications for, your Facebook Messenger in the various chats, or, disable notifications entirely. So, that's very annoying. It's the kind of thing where Facebook just keeps bugging the shit out of you so that you spend more time there than you would maybe ordinarily do. And Google Plus was never that invasive and obnoxious, and certainly has a much larger character limit than Twitter, and I think it even has a larger character limit than Facebook. I don't know about MySpace. I looked at it back when it first was around, and I was like, oh man, no, I don't like it. And so, so I did get a Facebook about the middle of 2018, and it originally did so to connect with, family members that I am not normally in contact with, that I would like to be in contact with, but unfortunately, they weren't on Google Plus, and they weren't on Twitter, and I'm told by one of my oldest niece that they're all on Facebook, and so I'm like, well, okay, I guess I'll make a Facebook now. And then, I guess it was September or October, Google announced that they were going to be phasing out Google Plus for consumers, and I'm like, oh, well, geez, that's great, what am I going to do now to get my political news and stuff? And then I'm like, hey, there are Facebook groups, so I started joining some Facebook groups, and then I got sucked into all that. But I have noticed that my interactions with people on Facebook, as an average, are more tolerable than some. I don't have a lot of bad interactions on Twitter, but I noticed that there tend to be people there who are more willing to be obnoxious, I guess I should say. I haven't really encountered that much on Facebook. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, because it does, but it seems like there's a greater chance of encountering a jackass on Twitter than there is on Facebook. So, there's that. But then, you've got the whole Zuckerberg censorship and the Atlantic Council and all that kind of horse shit that I don't want to. I would really much prefer that Google would fix Google Plus and let us continue to use it, because it really is, in my opinion, the very best social media platform out there. And it's, I've been there for several years now, and I'm going to miss it when it's gone. I own several communities there, and two of them, I've invited everyone to come and join my Discord, or to come and join the Facebook community that I set up to replace one of them. And so far, a few people have come and joined the Facebook, not very many. The big Google Plus group that I own back in 2016 had over 2,000 members, which, that may not seem like a lot, but for Google Plus, that wasn't bad. And there were certainly larger Google Plus groups, like the Occupy group that I'm a member of, which had, I don't know, probably 20,000 or more members. But at the time, in 2016, it was the largest pro-Bernie group on Google Plus, and then from the end of the Democratic National Convention until the general election of 2016, it was the largest pro-Jill Stein group on Google Plus. It was larger even than the official Green Party of the United States Google Plus community. over 2,000 members. Now, it being the off season, you know, because people come out to political stuff for the presidential contest, and they don't really pay as much attention to the you know, it's kind of the off season election that comes in the interim, or the midterms as they call it, that is just for senators and representatives and congressmen and governors and congressmen are representatives. Congress critters. They're all Congress critters, actually, senators as well as representatives, and I object most strenuously to representatives now styling themselves MC or member of Congress. No, you're supposed to be a representative of the people, not those corporations that keep lining your pockets. So get with the program, guys and gals. Anyway, and so, you know, people drifted away. There were a few people who left after we switched to supporting Jill Stein, but that was a vote that was taken in the community. It wasn't just myself and the other admins and moderators imposing that on them. We took a vote, and that was, you know, we agreed to change the name to Burners for Jill Stein, and that's what we were. The largest pro-Jill Stein community on Google+. Still, I think we still had over 2,000 members at that point. And then after the general election, people kind of, you know, drifted away again. We had I ran a series of straw polls at that point I solicited suggestions for a new name for the community, that we wanted to continue to, you know, be active and discuss politics and economics and social matters and history and whatnot. And eventually, we eliminated different names until we wound up with the name Progressive Fire, so that was it. And at the moment, I think we have somewhere around 1,650 members. I'm not sure. I haven't looked in there in the past week, really. I mean, I've been on the platform, certainly, to post some news and videos and so forth, but I didn't look at the membership list numbers for that community, so I'm not really sure. And certainly they've got the big banner across the top of all your Google Plus pages now that inform you Google Plus is going away on April the 4th or whatever. So there may be more people drifting away now. But I started a Progressive Fire community on Facebook, group rather, not community, since that's what they call it. On Facebook, once I found out that Google Plus was phasing out the consumer version of Google Plus, and I've also invited them to come to my Discord. So far, not as many have come to the Discord, unfortunately, and that's unfortunate because I do think that Discord is a better platform, a more user-friendly and less invasive platform than Facebook. I know a lot of them are going to something called MeWe, and I'm like, I've never heard of MeWe before, you know, before the Google Plus phasing out announcement, and it really sounds kind of like something a kid, you know, MeWe, what the hell? Sounds like a name a kid would come up with. So I don't, you know, it could be a kid. It could be some guy and girl or whatever in their 20s, and that, you know, okay. But it does seem like a rather silly name to me. There are other platforms people have suggested, but I think MeWe is probably the one that most of them have been talking about more than anything else other than Facebook. And certainly I've tried to promote coming to Facebook, and if you don't want to deal with the censorship and with the invasive, you know, invasion of privacy and, you know, the potential of being silenced because you say something that the Atlantic Council or Henry Kissinger or whomever doesn't like, then, you know, Discord, because the only censorship you're going to face there is mine, and my censorship is very light. You know, I don't care if you use profanity as long as you're not an obnoxious asshole about it. If you want to start talking about racial slurs or, you know, homophobic slurs or something, transphobic slurs, you know, no, you can't do that on my server. You know, sorry. I mean, jokes are acceptable, but it's not always easy to tell in a text medium when someone's joking about something. Anyway, so there's that. So obviously I'm getting tired because I'm rambling more and more now, but I do want to kind of get a few things in here before I end this. So I'm going to move on to the next article, and the last article of the evening, which is from January 23rd, 2018. It's also by Eric W. Dolan, and it's from SciPost.org. The article is Psychedelic Mushrooms Reduce Authoritarianism and Boost Nature-Relatedness, Experimental Study Suggests. Psilocybin, the active compound in magic mushrooms, could make people feel more connected to nature and less likely to endorse authoritarian views, according to new research from the Psychedelic Research Group at Imperial College London. The new study, published in the journal Psychopharmacology, is the first to provide experimental evidence that psilocybin treatment can lead to lasting changes in these attitudes. Study authors Taylor Lyons and Robin L. Carhart Harris write that, quote, our findings tentatively raise the possibility that, given in this way, psilocybin may produce sustained changes in outlook and political perspective here in the direction of increased nature-relatedness and decreased authoritarianism, end quote. So that's quite interesting. I've never done psilocybin mushrooms, so I've never done that myself, but it's certainly an interesting finding. The actual study is called Increased Nature-Relatedness and Decreased Authoritarian Political Views After Psilocybin for Treatment-Resistant Depression. Is from Psychopharmacology, and there will be a link to the study as well as this article in the video description. So, I mean, the article goes on a little bit longer. I'm not going to read it all. Obviously, I've been going quite some time now, and I think it's getting close to time for me to stop talking before I wreck my voice is already giving way, as anyone who's still listening might have noticed. At any rate, if you've enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe, and consider sharing on your social media. You know, if you like what I do here at my YouTube channel and or at The Progressive Flame, my publication on Medium, please consider becoming my patron through Patreon. The link for my Patreon is in the video description. I have a Discord server for my subscribers, as mentioned, and there is a special role and special channels, both video and text, for my patrons. So if you want to have a little more access to me and my thoughts, you might consider being a patron. The perks for being a patron are certainly listed on my Patreon page, and so forth. At any rate, I hope I have been informative and maybe somewhat entertaining. Maybe have taught you something or helped you to understand something. And if so, good. And so until next time, have fun, but stay safe. For Republic News, this is Liviana, signing off.